Translator unknown. Section 5. Of the Isle of Cuba. In the year of our Lord 1511, they passed over to Cuba, which contains as much ground in length as there is distance between Valladolid and Rome, well furnished with large and stately provinces, and very populous, against whom they proceeded with no more humanity and clemency, or indeed, to speak truth, with greater savageness and brutality. Several memorable transactions worthy observation passed in this island. A certain cacique, a potent peer named Hathney, who not long before fled Hispaniola to Cuba for refuge from death or captivity during life, and understanding by certain Indians that the Spaniards intended to steer their course thither, made this oration to all his people assembled together: "You are not ignorant that there is a rumor spread abroad among us of the Spaniards' arrival, and are sensible by woeful experience how such and such, naming them, and Hayti, so they term Hispaniola in their own language, with their inhabitants, have been treated by them, that they design to visit us with equal intentions of committing such acts as they have hitherto been guilty of. But do you not know the cause and reason of their coming?" "We are altogether ignorant of it," they replied, "but sufficiently satisfied that they are cruelly and wickedly inclined." Then thus he said: "They adore a certain covetous deity, whose cravings are not to be satisfied by a few moderate offerings, but they may answer his adoration and worship, demand many unreasonable things of us, and use their utmost endeavors to subjugate and afterwards murder us." Then taking up a cask or cabinet near at hand, full of gold and gems, he proceeded in this manner: "This is the Spaniards' God, and in honor of him, if you think well of it, let us celebrate our arcaitos, which are certain kinds of dances and caperings used among them, and by this means, his deity being appeased, he will impose his commands on the Spaniards, that they shall not for the future molest us." Who all unanimously with one consent in a loud tone made this reply: "Well said, well said." And thus they continued skipping and dancing before this cabinet, without the least intermission, till they were quite tired and grown weary. Then the noble Hathney, reassuming his discourse, said: "If we worship this deity till ye be ravished from us, we shall be destroyed. Therefore I judge it convenient, upon mature deliberation, that we cast it into the river," which advice was approved of by all without opposition, and the cabinet thrown into the next river. When the Spaniards first touched this island, this cacique, who was thoroughly acquainted with them, did avoid and shun them as much as in him lay, and defended himself by force of arms, wherever he met with them. But at length being taken, he was burnt alive, for flying from so unjust and cruel a nation, and endeavoring to secure his life against them, who only thirsted after the blood of himself and his own people. Now being bound to the post, in order of his execution, a certain holy monk of the Franciscan order discoursed with him concerning God and the articles of our faith, which he never heard of before, and which might be satisfactory and advantageous to him, considering the small time allowed him by the executioner, promising him eternal glory and repose, if he truly believed them, or otherwise everlasting torments. After that Hathney had been silently pensive some time, he asked the monk whether the Spaniards also were admitted into heaven, and he answering that the gates of heaven were open to all that were good and godly, the cacique replied without further consideration that he would rather go to hell than heaven, for fear he should cohabit in the same mansion with so sanguinary and bloody a nation. and thus God and the Holy Catholic Faith are praised and reverenced by the practices of the Spaniards in America. Once it so happened that the citizens of a famous city, distant 10 miles from the place where we then resided, came to meet us with a splendid retinue, to render their visit more honorable, bringing with them delicious viands and such kind of dainties, with as great a quantity of fish as they could possibly procure, and distributing them among us. But behold, on a sudden, some wicked devil, possessing the minds of the Spaniards, agitated them with great fury, that I being present, and without the least pretence or occasion offered, they cut off in cold blood above 3,000 men, women, and children promiscuously. Such inhumanities and barbarisms were committed in my sight as no age can parallel. Some time after I dispatched messengers to all the rulers of the province of Havana, that they would by no means be terrified or seek their refuge by absence and flight, but to meet us, and that I would engage, for they understood my authority, that they should not receive the least of injuries, for the whole country was extremely afflicted at the evils and mischiefs already perpetrated. And this I did with the advice of their captain. As soon as we approached the province, 22 of their noblemen came forth to meet us, whom the captain, contrary to his faith given, would have exposed to the flames, alleging that it was expedient they should be put to death, who were at any time capacitated to use any stratagem against us. But with great difficulty and much ado, I snatched them out of the fire. These islanders of Cuba, being reduced to the same vassalage and misery as the inhabitants of Hispaniola, seeing themselves perish and die without any redress, fled to the mountains for shelter. But other desperadoes put a period to their days with a halter, and the husband, together with his wife and children, hanging himself, put an end to those calamities. By the ferocity of one Spanish tyrant, whom I knew, above 200 Indians hanged themselves of their own accord, and a multitude of people perished by this kind of death. A certain person here in the same isle, constituted to exercise a kind of royal power, happened to have 300 Indians fall to his share, of which in 3 months, through excessive labor, 160 were destroyed, insomuch that in a short space there remained but a 10th part alive, namely 30. But when the number was doubled, they all perished at the same rate, and all that were bestowed upon him lost their lives, till at length he paid his last debt to nature and the devil. In 3 or 4 months' time, I being there present, 6,000 children and upward were murdered, because they had lost their parents, who labored in the mines. Nay, I was a witness of many other stupendous villainies. But afterward they consulted how to persecute those that lay hid in the mountains, who were miserably massacred, and consequently this isle made desolate, which I saw not long after, and certainly it is a dreadful and deplorable sight to behold it thus unpeopled and laid waste like a desert. End of section 5. Section 6 of A Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arnie Horton. A Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. Translator unknown. Section 6 of the Continent. In the year 1514, a certain unhappy governor landed on the firm land or continent, a most bloody tyrant, destitute of all mercy and prudence, the instrument of God's wrath, with a resolution to people these parts with Spaniards. And although some tyrants had touched here before him, and cruelty hurried them into the other world by several ways of slaughter, yet they came no farther than to the sea coast, where they committed prodigious thefts and robberies. But this person exceeded all that ever dwelt in other islands, though execrable and profligate villains, for he did not only ravage and depopulate the sea coast, but buried the largest regions and most ample kingdoms in their own ruins, sending thousands to hell by his butcheries. He made incursions for many miles continuance, that is to say, in those countries that are included in the territories of Darien and the provinces of Nicaragua, where are near 500 miles of the most fertile land in the world, and the most opulent for gold of all the regions hitherto discovered. And although Spain has been sufficiently furnished with the purest gold, yet it was digged out of the bowels and mines of the said countries by the Indians, where, as we have said, they perished. This ruler, with his complices, found out new inventions to rack, torment, force, and extort gold from the Indians. One of his captains, in a certain excursion undertaken by the command of his governor to make depredations, destroyed 40,000 persons and better, exposing them to the edge of the sword, fire, dogs, and variety of torments. Of all which a religious man of the order of St. Franciscus de S. Romano, who was then present, was an eyewitness. Great and injurious was the blindness of those presided over the Indians, as to the conversion and salvation of this people, for they denied in effect what they in their flourishing discourse pretended to, and declared with their tongue what they contradicted in their heart. For it came to this pass, that the Indians should be commanded, on the penalty of a bloody war, death, and perpetual bondage, to embrace the Christian faith, and submit to the obedience of the Spanish king, as if the Son of God, who suffered death for the redemption of all mankind, had enacted a law, when he pronounced these words: Go and teach all nations that infidels living peaceably and quietly in their hereditary native country should be imposed upon pain of confiscation of all their chattels, lands, liberty, wives, children, and death itself, without any precedent instruction to confess and acknowledge the true God, and subject themselves to a king whom they never saw or heard mentioned before, and whose messengers behaved themselves toward them with such inhumanity and cruelty as they had done hitherto, which is certainly a most fopish and absurd way of proceeding, and merits nothing but scandal, derision, nay, hell itself. Now suppose this notorious and profligate governor had been empowered to see the execution of these edicts performed, for of themselves they were repugnant both to law and equity, yet he commanded, or they who were to see the execution thereof did it of their own heads without authority, that when they fancied or proposed to themselves any place that was well stored with gold, to rob and feloniously steal it away from the Indians living in their cities and houses without the least suspicion of any ill act, these wicked Spaniards, like thieves, came to any place by stealth, half a mile off of any city, town, or village, and there in the night published and proclaimed the edict among themselves after this manner: You caciques and Indians of this continent, the inhabitants of such a place, which they named, we declare, or be it known to you all, that there is but one God, one hope, and one King of Castile, who is Lord of these countries. Appear forth without delay, and take the oath of allegiance to the Spanish king as his vassals. So about the 4th watch of the night, or 3 in the morning, these poor innocents, overwhelmed with heavy sleep, ran violently on that place they named, set fire to their hovels, which were all thatched, and so, without notice, burnt men, women, and children, killed whom they pleased upon the spot. But those they preserved as captives were compelled through torments to confess where they had hid the gold, when they found little or none at their houses. But they who lived, being first stigmatized were made slaves. Yet after the fire was extinguished, they came hastily in quest of the gold.